And hello, and welcome to tonight's program sponsored by Metro West Climate Solutions. I am Jeff Barstell. I'm a member of the steering committee and minister of First Parish Church in Weston, Unitarian Universalist. Metro West Climate Solutions is a partnership of congregations and organizations in the Metro West area, including First Parish Church in Weston, First Parish in Wayland, First Parish in Lincoln, the Congregational Church of Weston, the Sustainable Weston Action Group, and a growing list of organizations and individuals. If you are not on our mailing list, I invite you to go to our website and sign up, since we send out timely and topical information and programs about which we are hosting. Our mission as a group is to foster sustainable, resilient, and low-carbon communities and host timely and relevant programs to encourage people and organizations to get involved in bringing about solutions to some of the great challenges of our time. All of us, we believe, have a role to play in moving our society and our economy towards a low or no carbon future. For more information about our work, or to check out or view recordings of some of our previous programs, I encourage you to go to metrowestclimatesolutions.org. Our program for this evening was literally inspired by recent headlines and reports in the news, including the war in Ukraine, and how that has dramatically affected the markets for natural gas and oil in Europe and now around the world. This includes our region here in the Northeast. We actually have known for some time that New England's electricity challenges were becoming more significant, partly because older coal, oil, and nuclear fuel generators have been shut down, leaving gas-fired power plants to serve a greater percentage of the demand for electricity here in New England. This makes power here in our region particularly sensitive to the wholesale market for natural gas, and suggests that we could have a particularly difficult winter season ahead of us when it comes to power and heating oil prices. For example, in a rate filing by National Grid last month, the utility predicted that electricity rates could rise 60% from a year ago, with monthly bills rising from $179 to $293 on average. That has potentially devastating consequences for many low-income and even middle-class households around the state and around the region. Our guest speaker this evening is well qualified to speak to the issues of energy prices here in the Commonwealth and around New England. Larry Chretien is the Executive Director of Green Energy Consumers Alliance, which is a nonprofit based in Boston and Providence, serving Massachusetts and Rhode Island. The organization's mission is to speed our region's and nation's transition to clean energy. Larry and his group have a long track record of developing programs that help people make better and cleaner energy choices as families, as individuals, and as communities. I encourage you all to take a look at the Green Energy Consumers Alliance website and review some of the many programs and services they offer. I will say I personally have been using their green electricity program or offering for over 10 years now, both up on the North Shore and now here in Weston. On October 3rd, Green Energy Consumers celebrated its 40th fall meeting. And by coincidence, October 3rd also marked Larry's 23rd year as Executive Director. Before his current position, Larry was the Energy Director for Quincy Community Action Programs Incorporated. He has a master's degree in economic policy, and he lives in Quincy. Tonight's program will begin with Larry's presentation and then segue into an extended Q&A period. To ask a question or offer a comment, we ask you to use the Q&A button found on the toolbar on the bottom of your Zoom screen. We thank you all for coming, and we now welcome Larry Chretien.
Thank you, Jeff, and everybody. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm going to share my screen, and can you all see that? Can everybody see my screen? Am I all set?
Yeah,
Yes,
it looks great. Thank you.
All right, super. So tonight's topic is why are energy prices so high this winter? Where are we headed? There's a lot to that, so please buckle up. We have a lot of slides, and I'll run through them, and then happy to answer questions as the time is right. And so the first one is our organization. Jeff, thank you for the introduction, but our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a zero carbon future. This is our 40th year in existence, and we have a lot of work to do. And your help is greatly appreciated. Tonight's presentation has a few parts to it. I'll explain what prices are now, what the big picture causes are, where the energy markets seem to be going. I'll talk about the clean energy transition has been going too slowly, and where are we going in the short term and the long term, and then end up with some solutions. Each section could be over an hour, but I'm going to try to compress it all into that and give you time for questions. So first, the prices. You probably know some of this information, but National Grid's gas bills are going up 24% higher than last winter. Eversource's gas bills 34% higher than last winter. Most consumers in the state heat with gas. National Grid announced their basic service rate. That's the supply you would get from National Grid if you did not choose a competitive power supplier or if you were not part of a municipal aggregation. And that rate for November to April will be 34 cents, which is eye-popping. That's up from where it should be around 11 cents, maybe as high as 15, but it's going to be 34 for a 6-month period. The next shoe to drop is Eversource's rate for basic service. That's going to come out pretty soon. I believe they're going out to bid next week or so. And that is for the 6-month period of January 1st, 2023 to June 30th. We suspect it'll be in the same ballpark as National Grid's. Heating oil prices in Massachusetts, the state does a survey, and the price of last week average price was $5.71. That's up from $3.30 last October. So those are high prices all around. Everyone's going to pay more for heating their home and putting on the lights. So on electricity, here is the New England wholesale price history. And Jeff mentioned that. This graph is courtesy of Patrick Knight of Synapse Energy Economics. This is data for 2022 through the end of September. And this is adjusted for inflation, but this is what the wholesale price is. And it's instructive for a couple of reasons. You can see 2022 is way higher than the previous 5 or 6 years. It's a big jump, but let's put it in perspective. It's lower than 2008, adjusted for inflation. So we can get through this issue if we work together. I highlighted in yellow some years where wholesale prices were very, very low. And some economists are saying perhaps that was an anomaly. That's essentially the glory days of fracking, as that came to be, and that caused natural gas prices to come down quite a bit. But if you look at it over the history of fossil fuel development, those are unusually low years, and so maybe we're seeing a big reset on that. So the point is, wholesale prices are what essentially drives retail prices that we all pay. This next slide looks a little busy, but what it shows is that over 20 years, the wholesale price of electricity in New England is very much correlated, very much connected to what the price of natural gas is. And that's because we've become more and more dependent upon natural gas as the heating fuel, as the fuel for power production in New England. Our region is one of the most dependent upon natural gas in the country. Here's a slide showing where diesel and heating oil prices have been and are going. They approached $6 a gallon a little while ago, and they're heading back up there once again. So what are the causes of this? I'm going to get into causes and then where the markets are taking this. Uh, on the left-hand side is our friend, that's the virus that we're all having to deal with, right? And that has caused tremendous economic upheaval as well as tragedy all over the world and in this country. That is certainly what that did. One of the depressing effects that had was it shut down the economy in a lot of places. And so a lot of the energy developers just essentially stopped producing, whether it was fossil fuels, and it also put a pause on renewable energy investment as well for a bit, or at least the completion of projects. And that is in the big picture of economic history, we can blame it quite a bit on the COVID virus. On the right-hand side is a computer chip. That is one of the leading causes of the supply chain problems that we're all seeing. And those two things have combined to really cause economic disruption. And so why would that have an effect on energy prices? Well, essentially, as we try to recover from COVID, and as we try to recover from the computer chip issue, there's just a log jam, there's bottlenecks, and this is, supply is constrained. Demand, people want to buy stuff, that's causing upward pressure on prices. But we have to look at the February 24th, 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine. This is going to go down in history. It's still going on. It's going to go on for a while because Vladimir Putin is so persistent. But the effect of that war on the energy markets in the world is akin, very much similar to those of us who are old enough to remember the 1973 and 1979 oil shocks caused by our dependence upon OPEC oil. We're at this again, and Vladimir Putin knows it. He's using energy as a weapon to try to achieve the goals that he has, and it's pretty effective. There's supply being reduced to Europe, and that is causing upheavals all over the world. So rather recently, just 2 to 4 weeks ago, OPEC Plus, which is the oil producing exporting countries, including Russia and Venezuela and some others, have all colluded, as they often do, to reduce the supply of oil because they want to jack up the price. Some would say, and I would agree, it seems like they're also doing this in order to somewhat manipulate the 2022 midterm elections, but that's having a big effect as well. Essentially, what we're seeing here is Saudi Arabia has essentially taken this time to partner up and support Russia in the activity of it's an economic war as well as a hot war in Ukraine. So what is what's the result of this? What does it look like? There's a term called black swan, which is events that are highly unlikely to happen, but would have severe consequences if they did. So I would say the COVID virus is perhaps a black swan event. I would say the computer chip problem might be a black swan event. Certainly the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we know that there's been, all kinds of military shenanigans by Russia over the years, but that was a big, huge event, the largest scale event of its kind since World War II. And so those are black swan events. Or you can pick a different metaphor. It's a perfect storm, which is an unusual combination of events or things that produce an unusually powerful result. There are synergies to all these things. When you put COVID and when you put the computer chip issue and you put the war all together in one bag, bad things are going to happen. And that's what we're seeing all across the world, and certainly in this country and in our region. So I'll give you an example of why we would consider it to be perhaps a black swan situation. There's a study that's done every couple of years called the Avoided Energy Supply Cost Study. It's done in New England, and the purpose of it is to figure out how much energy efficiency we should get through the Mass Save program here in Massachusetts. And the idea is we want to buy as much energy efficiency as we can to avoid having to pay for energy supply. And so Synapse Energy Economics did the study in 2021. they projected out that over the next 15 years, the average price of winter electricity should be 6 cents. I've already told you that Eversource from July 22nd to December 22nd is 18.6 cents. It's probably going to go up to the high 20s or early 30s. National Grid's 34 cents. So, there we are, 34 cents compared to 6 cents. That's a factor of over 6. So Synapse Energy Economics does a great job, but they could not have foreseen the issues that I just laid out. That was not in the deck. So what is this doing to energy markets? So first of all, even before the war in July of 2022, no, sorry, this is after the war started. The price of natural gas in New England was 10 times almost what it was a year ago in 2021. And when natural gas prices spike, that's bad news for those of us who heat our homes with gas. The utilities have to go out into the market and buy gas at a higher price, but that has a big problem, causes a big spike in electricity prices when it's very cold in the winter and when it's very hot in the summer, as that graph shows you. We can deal with relatively high gas prices in the shoulder months like October or April, but when August was really hot and we experienced very high electricity prices in August. So as Jeff mentioned, and I'll say again, a lot of people don't realize how much we have shifted towards natural gas in the last couple decades. The good news is that we use hardly any coal and oil anymore, when in 2020, 40% of our power came from coal and oil. Now it's less than 1% of those things, but we essentially went to natural gas in a big way. And we have a lot of natural gas fired power plants in New England serving our needs. I'll get into why it doesn't have to be that way much longer. But here's another graph showing where does natural gas in New England fit in with the world. So the blue line is and the orange line is essentially what we pay in the United States. The other three lines are Europe and Japan. Essentially, they all move essentially in the same direction. Some are higher than others. And the reason why some are higher than others is it depends a lot on how much they have to import in the form of liquefied natural gas. If everyone could have gas piped to their region, the prices would be looking more uniform. But the point is that shows us how much they're all related. When one goes up, it's a worldwide market. When demand goes up in one of these areas, it's going to affect the price in the other areas as well. So again, in Europe, we're seeing this perfect storm. This graph is showing how power is being produced in Europe now compared to 1 year ago. And looking from left to right, nuclear power, France, for some reason, I don't know all the details, has had a number of nuclear power plants out of commission. It was hot in the summer, hydro production was down. And how did they make up for the fact that all these, the nuclear and hydro, which are pretty stable priced commodities, what we're seeing in Europe is gas picked up quite a bit. But wind and solar are also contributing to the solution in Europe over the last year. But the gas increase is significant, and that's one of the things that's affecting prices around the world. This map shows, I know it's quite busy, but how did all these countries in Europe get their gas when, as you can see by the red lines coming from Russia, for the most part, Russia's turning down the spigot, where the European countries don't want to buy Russian oil. Well, they're buying it from Norway, they're buying it from Algeria, and they're buying it globally in the form of liquefied natural gas. And the United States is one of the big providers of natural gas to Europe right now in the form of liquefied natural gas. Now, that's helping Europe deal with the problem that Russia's creating, but it's driving up the price of gas and electricity here in the United States and here in New England. Important to see that the United States has a record high gas production. In other words, this is showing us that, you might say good news, the United States is a little bit more energy independent than it was 20 years ago. And this graph is showing where all the different fields are for natural gas. But right now what we're seeing is we're having to export a lot of that. It makes the gas companies very happy, very profitable, the oil companies as well, but the export of the fuel is driving up prices around here. So this graph shows that we did not, as a country, did not export much gas, excuse me, until 2016. Now 11% of what we produce in the United States is being exported, and it's going to go up over the winter. Oil, we talked about OPEC being another problem in terms of oil prices. What this table shows is the production and usage of oil by different countries. The United States is the world's #1 oil producer. The problem, though, we use more than we produce. So we're not fully energy independent by a long shot. Saudi Arabia produces a lot more than it uses, and that makes them a swing supplier, meaning they can ratchet up or down as they see fit. And they'll manipulate the market to their advantage. Russia can pretty much do the same thing. They produce a lot more than they use. Most countries are not able to do that. So in the oil market in the world, Saudi Arabia and Russia are very powerful players. So that affects heating oil. That affects diesel. Diesel is the workhorse of the world's economy. It runs the trucks, runs power plants in a lot of countries, and it heats a lot of homes in the New England area. This graph shows that the dotted line, the white line that's higher than the green line, shows the average amount of inventory in the United States since from 1992 to 2021. The green line shows where we are now. Our inventories are much lower than they normally are because essentially a lot of the diesel fuel is going to Europe. And this is a problem. We're heading into the winter in New England with not very much diesel and heating oil, which is essentially the same product. And it's important to note that, which is there's even a possibility that if in the winter, if gas prices go high enough, natural gas prices, a lot of power plants will shift their usage and begin to use more diesel fuel in the power plants, which is essentially competing with the heating oil market. So we could have a double whammy in that respect. So a big point we want to make is the clean energy transition is just simply going too slowly. A few years ago, the British Prime Minister at the time, David Cameron, set out a directive. He wanted to cut the green crap, as he put it. And now the Carbon Brief organization, an advocacy group, calculated that in the United Kingdom, gas imports would be 13% lower today in 2022 if it had not cut the green crap. And so what was cut were things that cost a lot less than natural gas. So what they cut was efficiency programs, onshore wind, and deep energy retrofits in zero carbon homes. So it's very counterproductive. The data shows that that's the case in the United Kingdom. In Texas, they essentially, let's see what happens in Texas with respect to the green crap. What we learned, the Energy Information Administration came out with a report saying that in Texas, power prices, electricity prices, are affected more by how much the wind production is going in Texas than by how much electricity usage is happening in Texas. So in the winter or in the summer, when you see big price spikes, you hear about concerns in Texas, it's usually because maybe it's not windy at the time. But so it was calculated, another group in, I think, out of the University of Texas, did a study that said the wind and solar that's available in Texas has saved Texans $7 billion in 2022 compared to natural gas. So once again, the green crap is doing its part to help reduce energy bills in another place. Now, how about New England? How about our own green crap? Paraphrasing David Cameron. So our friends at Synapse Energy Economics told me that from 2008 to 2012, just looking from January through August, not the entire year, that electricity usage in New England was 88 terawatt hours. From 2013 to 2022, the load was 81 terawatt hours. The difference is 8%. If you multiply that 7 terawatt hour difference times the price of electricity that we would have to pay for natural gas, it has saved us at least $600 million in 2022 so far. And so what do we mean by the green crap? What we're saying is the Mass Save program is significant, and so is what we call the rooftop solar. That's what we call behind the meter solar. That reduces the amount of electricity that has to be generated in the New England power pool. So the energy efficiency and the solar have helped, it's called price suppression. They've helped keep electricity bills down in New England compared to what they would be if we were just simply buying more natural gas. Folks in Weston, I think, are aware of this issue. The Department of Public Utilities is moving too slowly in terms of approving plans by communities for municipal aggregation. Weston has going on 2 years, I believe, to get their plan approved. Communities that have aggregations right now are not going to see the 34 cents per kilowatt hour that National Grid consumers are going to see, or approximately that Eversource customers would see. So here's an example of where our own state agency is kind of making things harder for us than it should be. Add to this, there have been some project delays that are having a big impact on our electricity bills. The Vineyard Wind project is the first one that's going to benefit Massachusetts. It could be up and running by now, or certainly in 2023. But that project was very deliberately delayed by the Trump administration, getting approvals through that bureaucracy. Another project, and so that project probably will come online late 2023. And hopefully it won't slip any further than that. You probably also have read or heard, but Massachusetts signed a contract to purchase hydropower from Hydro-Quebec. It was going to come through what's called the New England Clean Energy Connector, which is a transmission corridor that would run through Maine. It was permitted, but voters in Maine said that they don't want to have it. And so now the case is in court. That project should have been up and running by now, or should be up running soon, but now its fate is to be determined. And that would have been 20% of Massachusetts load at a very stable price. Both Vineyard Wind and Hydro-Quebec and other offshore wind projects are much, much less in cost than the power we would get from fossil fuel power plants, natural gas power plants. So if those projects were not delayed, this winter wouldn't be so bad here in Massachusetts and New England. So where's all this going? In the short term, we'll do the short term first. It's like riding a roller coaster with a blindfold I honestly can't tell you if it's going to go up or it's going to go down. The markets are in such turmoil. It's almost unbelievable. Every day we're getting different uh, bits of news that makes the market unsure as to where things are going to go. Um, the problem of natural gas and oil supplies being reduced to Europe and causing these exports that we're referring to is a big problem for the next year or two at least. But I'll just tell you something. In the last few days, prices have come down a little bit on what's called the spot market. And that's because Europe has bought as much natural gas as they can store. And so they've filled up essentially all the reservoirs they have to store the natural gas. And so right now, they can't store anymore. They can't buy anymore for a few days. October has been pretty warm in Europe and also here in Massachusetts. And so that's sort of taken a little bit of the curse off. But we're heading into the winter. We don't know what the weather's going to be this winter. It won't take much to reverse that. Once they start drawing on the stored natural gas in Europe, they don't have the ability to fill that reservoir as fast as they're going to take it out when it starts getting cold. So what's really critical, this affects us all in Massachusetts, it's weather in the cold parts of the world, not just in Weston or Quincy, where I live. It's going to be all over the world. And so the blue color is on this map is where temperatures tend to be above average. And so we have a worldwide energy market. And so if it's cold in Europe, prices are going to be high in Massachusetts. If it's cold in Russia or Japan, prices are going to be high in Massachusetts. And so we just, if you want to know how bad things are going to get in terms of prices, the biggest factor is going to be how cold it gets. In New England, the folks who run the New England power grid are warning us that it's possible, not likely at all, but it's possible that we could have electricity shortages this winter. And a lot will have to do with how much LNG we have to, how much we're going to have to import. We're going to have to compete with other major consuming countries of LNG. And again, because of the war in Ukraine, keeps coming back to that. And what's important to know is here in New England, we do not have what's we would call a robust winter demand response program. The utilities run a program in the summer where they might tell you, you know what, we're seeing peak demand because of air conditioning. It's over 90 degrees. The grid is stressed. Please do what you can to reduce your electricity consumption. There's no such thing that they run to any great effectiveness for the winter. And rather recently, a spokesman from Eversource said, well, we don't see a great potential for saving a lot of energy through a winter demand response program. Well, that's probably based upon the historic view of what a winter is when natural gas prices are relatively low. That's not what we're going to see for this winter and next. So unfortunately, I don't think our utilities are well prepared to run a program that encourages people to conserve wisely to the extent that they can in the winter. In Europe, they very much are planning for blackouts, and they have contingency plans for that. They're going to try to save as much gas as they can to keep people warm at home, but it's going to have a big impact on their industries, which might have to be told to stop using natural gas. Again, winter temperatures are going to be key. A fun fact is European imports of natural gas are 7% from Russia. They're still getting some natural gas from Russia. It was 41% before the war. So that difference has to be made. That's where the liquefied natural gas comes into play. A lot of it's coming from the United States. Short term, we need to increase fuel assistance, also known as low-income heating assistance. Every year, the federal government spends about $3.8 billion nationwide to help low-income people with their fuel bills. Community action agencies run that program. And it's never enough. Those are the folks who have to be determined to be low income, and their energy burden, which is the amount of they spend on energy as a percentage of their income, is several times higher than it might be for you or me. This year, there are some advocates, including my organization, is asking the Massachusetts legislature to put in some state money, which they've done occasionally over the last 20 years, but we're asking them to put aside $20 to $50 million of state money to supplement whatever Massachusetts gets from the federal government. It's going to be horrific for low-income people this winter. Long term, we're seeing some signs where the world is getting it. We've got to get off fossil fuels because of what it's doing to the climate, but also what it's doing in terms of security, national security for all these countries. So here's an interesting story. Look at the heat pump boom in Germany. People are getting it. People in Germany, if they can get a heat pump, they're ordering one because they would rather heat their home with a heat pump than seeing their natural gas bills go through the roof. So that's a good sign. Another sign is Europe is importing more solar panels from China. The graph is very similar. Anyone who can put solar up in Europe is doing it this year. Here's a sign that is very promising. For the first time ever, worldwide, capital investment in renewable energy is up higher than investment in oil and gas. And the trend is continuing that way. The Inflation Reduction Act is going to keep that going. And so there's an expression called, capital expenditure is destiny. What the investments made today, that will determine the future in a short amount of time. And it'll be long lasting. This is an example of, this is from the folks who run the New England Power Pool, the new ISO New England, of projects under development this year. A huge amount of wind power in the United States, in New England. There's 12,000 megawatts of offshore wind being contemplated. And there's a lot onshore wind as well, and quite a bit of solar. And that has changed dramatically over the last few years. The amount of renewable energy being put into the pipeline compared to natural gas is very impressive. Unfortunately, these projects aren't yet running for this winter. That's what we need. So in particular, offshore wind, our organization is part of the New England Offshore Wind Coalition. There's a huge amount of projects being developed up and down the East Coast, including at the very top. Maine is going to experiment with floating offshore wind turbines, but Massachusetts has contracts for over 3,000 megawatts of wind power. The legislature passed a climate bill that authorized Massachusetts to buy up to 10,000 megawatts of offshore wind power. Revolution Wind is power that's going to go to Rhode Island. Park City Wind is going to Connecticut. And we're hearing the Beacon Wind is going to be purchased by New York. And we know that there's a whole number of other projects coming up behind them. And so offshore wind is, we think it's our best hope of solving the climate crisis. It's the largest lever we can pull to reduce climate emissions, but it also defeats natural gas very well, because wind power is at its best in the winter. And so the only thing that's unfortunate about these projects is they're not up and running now. The Inflation Reduction Act, we're very excited about that, the bill that was signed by President Biden. It's 4 different studies by excellent groups. They're all saying essentially the same thing, that it's going to drive a huge amount of clean power by 2030. What's even better is that the there's a group called Chretien that predicts that the wind and solar production as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act is probably going to be up to 3 times more than what the Biden administration was projecting. Because, in part because we're seeing the turmoil in the world power markets. But, wind and solar power essentially is looking far more competitive, and the tax breaks that are available through the Inflation Reduction Act are going to have a dramatic effect over time. Bloomberg New Energy Finance did a great story about saying that there are several different categories that we would look at in clean energy: solar power, electric cars, grid scale batteries, heat pumps. All of these things are reaching into what we would call getting to the tipping point, where there's mass adoption beginning to happen. A lot of theorists, and myself included, say that once you can get an emerging technology or product up to at least 5% of the population, that's where it really begins to take off, and the adoption rate begins to pick up. And so what they're saying is that's essentially where we are with these key technologies in 87 countries already. And so that we can be optimistic about where this is going. Again, I have to keep saying it's not going to happen before this winter. As something to look at in the future, Synapse Energy Economics produced this beautiful butterfly curve. What it shows is in order to achieve our climate goals, we're going to have to electrify everything. We're going to have to shift from gasoline-powered cars to electric cars. We're going to have to shift from oil and gas heating systems to heat pumps. What's that going to do, though? It will increase our electricity consumption over time. And what's kind of interesting here is that right now, New England has a summer peak for electricity, that's where the time of year, July and August, when we're going to use the most electricity. By about 2035, if we're installing enough heat pumps, we'll turn into a winter peaking region. And that's a problem that we can manage, but it's interesting to see that. And again, what it tells me is that offshore wind and heat pumps are like peanut butter and jelly. They really need to go together. And so we need to adopt heat pumps, but the best way to meet the electricity demand created by the heat pumps is through offshore wind. Now, what are the obstacles, distractions, limitations of all this? One thing I worry about is, as a society, are we going to actually build all these offshore wind turbines? Are we going to build enough solar? Are we going to bring in that power from Hydro-Quebec? There's that NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. If we're not going to build all those renewable energy generating facilities, how disciplined are we going to be? Are we going to save enough energy? Are we going to button down our houses as they should be? Or are we going to shift from gasoline-powered cars to electric cars? What if we don't? What if people say, no, I don't want to buy a heat pump? These things are going to depend upon us to adopt and depend upon us to cite. So those are the things I tend to worry about. So what are some solutions going forward? I think there are plenty, but we've got to do them all. Massachusetts has a renewable portfolio standard and something similar called the Clean Energy Standard. It's still moving too slowly. We need to ratchet it up. We need to get to 100% clean electricity as fast as we can. We do work in Rhode Island where they've voted the law. It is now law in Rhode Island by 2033, 100% of the electricity in Rhode Island will be consumed in Rhode Island will be from renewable energy. We need to match that here in Massachusetts. I've already said we need to buy more offshore wind, Hydro-Quebec. The 2022 climate bill also has a stipulation to purchase more wind power from onshore in Maine, up to 1,000 megawatts. We need a modern grid with advanced meters, smart meters. We have dumb meters in our house right now that they can't tell you the time of day, which they should be able to. So it doesn't, right now with the meters we have, whether you use power during a peak period or an off-peak period, it doesn't matter, you're paying the same rate. So there's no incentive to try to time when you might charge your electric car or run the dishwasher or run the laundry. We could shave the peaks with demand response. I already talked about that a little bit. We should have more utility scale storage and vehicle to grid. You're going to hear more about that, which is when you buy an electric car, there'll be times when you want to charge it off peak, but more and more electric cars are coming with bi-directional capability, which means that you can discharge from your car to the grid. So imagine doing that during a cold winter's day when we're trying to keep our houses warm with heat pumps. You get this big battery in your electric car sitting out in the driveway. My car sits in the driveway, probably 22 to 23 hours a day. And we have to electrify everything. I've already said that, cars and heating systems. And we need carbon pricing, which essentially says, tries to tilt the economy away from fossil fuels towards clean energy. This whole discussion could go on for days about what solutions we have, but they're right in front of us and we can adopt them, and we need to adopt them more quickly. So I'm wrapping up. So our organization is, I've said, celebrating our 40th year. Please check us out. Go to our website. And if you're so inclined, we would appreciate donations. We're a nonprofit organization. I've got a great staff that run great programs and do all kinds of great advocacy. We have a lot of events on our events page, greenenergyconsumers.org/events. We promoted this event on our website, but we've got some more coming up that you might be interested in. You might want to bookmark that because we just always have events. This time of year, we're going to do a lot of webinars ourselves. And we've been in that mode since COVID. And that's it. I hope that was all helpful to you. I guess I'll stop sharing, and now it's time for questions.
All right, thank you, Larry. Thank you very much. That was an unbelievably comprehensive and quick overview. You covered an amazing amount of territory in less than 50 minutes. So thank you for that.
Okay.
And actually, some of the comments are saying just that. Thank you very much for, this was really good, very substantive. Joel, do you want to jump in on some of the Q&A, or do you want me to just start reading off a few of these?
There's a number that have been sent directly to Larry. If you would like to answer
Larry,
them.
you go ahead.
They should be in your chat.
Okay. Let's see. I'll start with what's the reason that the Department of Public Utilities is moving so slowly on municipal aggregation? Are there special interest involved? I do believe there are special interest involved. Eversource, I know, does not like aggregation. I think that's a factor. I don't think that the current administration grasp the benefits to consumers of aggregation, or they appreciate how much municipal aggregation can help the state achieve its climate goals. And I'll be very frank, it's personnel at the DPU that they just don't get it. And I hope that the new governor will appoint different commissioners of the Department of Public Utilities. And that I know that some legislators who are watching this, and there might be some legislation that will sort of address that. But if they don't have enough staff at the Department of Public Utilities to manage these plans, they have not said that as far as I know publicly. I think there would be support in the legislature to give them more money if that's what was needed. Stephen asked, doesn't Massachusetts electricity cost more than other states even before Ukraine? That is true. There's a few reasons for that. Of course, we are at the end of the pipe, as we say, right? We don't produce fossil fuels in New England. We only consume them. And more and more, because of we're importing into our region liquefied natural gas, there are pipeline constraints. Getting gas through a pipeline is a little bit cheaper. But I would say, I think the record shows that it's our dependence on fossil fuels, on natural gas, that is the main reason our costs are higher. I just keep coming back to the fact that particularly offshore wind power is so much cheaper than natural gas, and we just don't have that resource in place yet. Or the Hydro-Quebec project. Lee says, is a big cause of rising prices the excess profits of big oil companies? And do you agree that we need an excess profits tax on oil companies being proposed in Congress with the money going to low-income consumers? I certainly could support that. The profits of the big oil companies, they're going through the roof. In particular, if you own an oil refinery, you're making profits that are 4 to 5 times higher than they have been for over the last 20 years. That's a big reason why the cost of diesel fuel, if you need it for your truck or for your heating system, is the equivalent of $200 a barrel. So do we need a windfall profits tax or an excess profits tax that could go to low income people? I'd be in favor of that. But hopefully they are being taxed more because their income is going up as well. Let's see.
Hey, Larry, let me just note that several people have asked about community choice aggregation and what that means. And we're going to share, there was an article in the Boston Globe that actually, in which you're quoted from a week ago on Sunday on October 16th. And maybe we can share that link, Stephanie, with the folks. It's behind the Boston Globe paywall, but it provides a good explanation of community choice aggregation and why that's so important for communities around the state.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I'll take a step back then. I apologize if I didn't mention what that was. Community choice aggregation, or what we call is municipal aggregation. That's when a community in Massachusetts that has an investor-owned utility like Eversource and National Grid or Unitil, they can, by law, can choose the electricity supplier that serves the community. You would still have Eversource and National Grid owning the wires and the meter and doing the billing, the distribution services of electricity. But it allows a community to choose the electricity supply. And so a lot of communities have decided to do that over the last, say, 20 years. And the impact has been to, usually communities are trying to have a greener product. And what we did an analysis and showed that a lot of communities with a greener electricity supply are saving enough electricity, or saving on their rates about 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour. This is before the war in Ukraine. And that's an average of $78 per year per household in Massachusetts. And those customers are getting much greener power than Eversource and National Grid are providing. Now the communities that have these aggregations in place, they're saving hundreds of dollars per year. And so I live in Quincy, which is just like Weston, waiting for DPU approval. And I think that my being a National Grid customer, rather than being part of an aggregation, is going to cost me over $600 more than it should. So aggregation is working very effectively. If you want to look at a report, we have it on our website, greenenergyconsumers.org/aggregation.
Great.
Next question. How will heating cost increases differ if we're using gas to heat versus a heat pump to heat? The honest answer is right now, a high efficiency gas heating system is pretty hard to beat in terms of cost. What's also true is we can't solve our climate problems by having gas heating systems. So we need to transition towards heat pumps. And that's why Mass Save is awfully important. That's why the Massachusetts Clean Energy and Climate Plan has a direction where they want us to install 1 million heat pumps in Massachusetts by 2030. But right now it is a challenge. The heat pump, there's a great demand. People want to do the right thing. And it is difficult to get an installer to come to your house and to give you a bid. And there's a bit of a gold rush for heat pumps. Our organization also has a program for heat pumps. If you go to our website, you can look for it. we have partnered with a company called Abode Energy Management that will help you get bids from qualified installers, and they will help you figure out which bid is right for you, so that you can feel confident that you bought the right thing. Neither our organization or Abode cares who you buy your heat pump from, but we hope that you'll look into it. But if you're price sensitive, right now a heat pump is not necessarily going to provide you with quick savings, but over the long run, if you finance a heat pump, it's probably going to be cheaper than natural gas over the long run. One question was, one problem I didn't mention is that there are environmental groups that oppose low carbon energy production like hydro and nuclear. And he mentions the Natural Resources Council of Maine and what can be done to counter their opposition. Well, that is true. There are environmental, I know some people in Maine who oppose that Hydro-Quebec project. And there are even groups in Massachusetts that I respect, like the Appalachian Mountain Club, would rather not see that sort of thing. And, when we can deal with groups like that, it is a democratic society. I think we all have to talk to our elected officials and tell them what we want. I think that the climate crisis has to be met like a climate crisis. And so, but what bothers me is a lot of the opposition in Maine was funded by fossil fuel corporations in the background. And so there's dark money at play, and there's a lot of misinformation, but we got to keep working at it. We've got to find ways of siting these facilities. And if we're not going to site the facilities, we're going to have to learn how to use a lot less energy than we're using now. One person says, can I get a home wind power generator if solar is not an option for me? Do they have small versions? Yes, they do, but I would not buy one. They don't work as elegantly as solar panels do, and they don't work as well as, basically wind power needs to be big, and it needs to be off-site. I do know of some folks in remote areas. I actually vacationed in Maine where they had a home wind power site, and it worked great, but there weren't any neighbors, and they are kind of noisy, and that was off grid. A beautiful solar array and a wind turbine and some battery storage, no utility in the area. So it worked in that application, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing we're going to have in Eastern Massachusetts. So I think I would look at solar on your roof or community shared solar, and I would find out whether or not your community is doing municipal aggregation. Letitia says, should our government be doing a public service campaign to use less and do things like that might be symbolic, but send the message, like turning the lights off at the Eiffel Tower in public buildings, for example? I totally agree with that. I mean, here we are in October, the writing is on the wall about how difficult this winter is going to be, and we're just not hearing that to any great extent. That is something I encourage you to contact our next governor and tell the next governor that you want to see some more action and to be taking this seriously. Let's see. Someone's asking about Lincoln is renegotiating community aggregation contract that they already have. What should we expect to happen in the relationship between the cost of the clean energy component and the cost of the fossil fuel component? Do they move together? Honestly, timing's not super for Lincoln if you have to renegotiate. The main thing that's going to affect your retail price is the cost of fossil fuels in the near term. We are trying to get, ultimately, what our organization is trying to do is to build a connection between the aggregation potential in a community and those offshore wind projects. It's going to take some time, but the climate bill that passed in Massachusetts over the summer has language in there that we wrote, and the legislators were kind enough to pass it, that essentially allows aggregations to work with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to hopefully sign long-term contracts with offshore wind developers So that would be one way of fixing the price of electricity from new beautiful projects that we want to see developed offshore. So it's not going to happen quickly, but that's like our organization is kind of fixated on that. We think that's ultimately the long-term solution. More questions?
Larry, there's some pretty sophisticated questions coming in here. Let me just, I note that Peter here posed one just a moment ago. Do you think that municipal aggregation should be able to enter into long-term offshore wind contracts, power purchase agreements?
Yes, and that's actually why we did the bill that we did, the amendment that passed in the climate bill. It's a little difficult. There's a little bit of a mismatch. We're going to have to educate the aggregations to do longer term contracts. They typically do 3-year contracts. An offshore wind developer can't build a project with customers lined up for just 3 years at a time. So that's something we have to work on because we know that the aggregations are going to be around for the long run. And that's where the Mass Clean Energy Center comes in. They can be sort of a intermediary or backstop. And so we're probably going to be pulling together some communities to talk about this and try to figure out what we need to get done. I think that's something else we'll be talking to the new administration about.
All right. And then I'm seeing, let me just ask this one to you since there's some very smart policy people here who I know follow the DPU closely. Massachusetts does not have time of use pricing for electricity. How much difference could that make during a tight supply conditions such as we expect this winter?
I think it would have a big effect. Time of use pricing, essentially, it's been proven when it's well designed and then well explained. Consumer education is very important. Gives people options. There's a huge amount of electricity that I could show you a graph, but essentially, when we use power during peak periods, usually from 4:00 p.m. to 7:00 p.m. during the weekday, compared to at nights and on weekends, the difference in cost of serving us with electricity is enormous. And so if we're cavalier about when we use power, then we're paying a premium. But if we think about the timing of things, now we may not want to, we want our lights to go on at night. We don't need them during the day. So that's a fixed thing. We certainly want the heating systems to run, the heat pumps to run when it's cold. But, there's a lot of power demand that we can shift. And so I keep using the main ones would be electric cars, which are coming on in a big way, but, dryers, dishwashers, clothes washers, and, any number of other appliances that hot water tanks, those kinds of things. It's been proven to be able to significantly depress, in other words, a 5% shift in power can save us a lot more than 5% in money. And it also reduces emissions because we're backing down. We can use it. The power that we use won't necessarily have to be met by natural gas. It could be met by wind or solar, depending upon the timing.
Right. It's hard to explain the wholesale power market and the system of auctions that provide us with the magic of electricity 24/7. But that's how this works behind the scenes. Not all electricity is priced at the same level. It kind of escalates.
Right.
Let's see. Is clean hydrogen, for example, waste to hydrogen technology a factor in the future?
Hydrogen is going to have a role in the economy over time. We think it should be focused on areas that are very parts of our economy that are very hard to electrify. They're very hard to decarbonize, like industrial heating processes and things. But, and this is going to be a big topic over the next year. National Grid and Eversource and other gas companies in the state want to use hydrogen and a thing called renewable natural gas in heating our homes. And that's a dumb use of hydrogen. Essentially, to make hydrogen cleanly, that requires wind and solar. And if you have wind and solar, the smart thing to do is just to make electricity with it and to put it into the grid. So the utilities will say that, oh, it's great, we can use it to heat homes or buildings and all that. Essentially, they're just looking to perpetuate their business model. And if you're making hydrogen from natural gas, well, that's not clean. The conversion process, there's so much inefficiency to creating the hydrogen, it's not worth it. So a lot of people were thinking years ago that hydrogen would be a great way to move cars, but electric vehicles have done so much better. And now we're finding that it's better to run even big trucks on electricity rather than hydrogen. So there will be some important uses for hydrogen, but it really should not be a focus of Massachusetts policy for several years. We've got so many other things to do.
Let's see. Let me just take a quick look. Let's see. I don't see a whole lot of other questions. I see one from Tony, but I don't know if I quite understand the question. It has to do with the percentage of gas and oil that make up our electricity. And doesn't that mean that if we switch over to heat pumps, we're just paying more for gas and oil? I don't think that's the case, especially if we decarbonize our electric sector like you're proposing.
Well, actually, so yes, what is happening, Massachusetts will have every year more renewable energy in our mix. But the grid's already cleaner than people think. We do have a fair amount of hydro and nuclear power that is zero emission, in wind and solar. But here's the key. The heat pump uses natural gas more efficiently than a natural gas heating system. So we'll end up in society using less natural gas with heat pumps, even if we power the electricity with natural gas. But the point is, we want to electrify everything, but we do also want to add that renewable energy resource as we go. It'll be gradual. We'll be able to do it.
Larry, I think Joel has a couple other questions he had sent to you.
Okay. Let's see.
Hard to see.
The aggregation plan in Lowell costs more, and therefore low-income families are not motivated to be part of it. How can this be changed so that you can have more low and moderate income households involved in green energy? There is a problem in Lowell, as I understand, which is that the way the rate structure works in Lowell is different than in most communities. So I could talk to you offline about that one, Joel. But there are ways, the city of Boston has proposed a plan where they were going to do a big community solar program through their aggregation that was going to provide credits on the bills of low-income people, and the Department of Public Utilities held that up. And so that's a problem. The Cape Light Compact, which serves all the towns on Cape Cod, had another program directed at low-income people that got held up by the Department of Public Utilities. So there, the DPU is not our friend for anyone who wants to do something innovative with renewable energy or low-income people. But one of the keys to the whole thing, what we like about aggregation is we give consumers a chance. If they want to pay a little bit more, they can opt up to 100% renewable energy. And if they want to save a little bit of money, they can even opt down. If they're low income, they can opt down if they want to, and they wouldn't pay for any more renewable energy than required by state law. So there's that flexibility, but everyone benefits from the renewable energy. The people who are buying 100% renewable energy aren't getting anything. They're actually contributing to societal good. It's a public benefit. So we think aggregations, when the structure is right, provides that balance, or better than balance, to provide multiple benefits to everybody.
All right, we're quickly approaching the end of our time together. Let me. I don't know if Joel, if there's one more question that Joel had sent to you or not.
Well, let me ask one that's come in is about geothermal, network geothermal, which of course doesn't require solar or wind and runs all the time. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, there's a great group called HEAT, HEET, that sort of is pushing that idea. They're working with the utilities to pilot a couple projects. The first one that is being developed is in Framingham. HEAT and Eversource are working on that. I really hope that takes off. I think it's when you can find the right location where it can be done. It's perfect for like a large new development or a campus like a university that's got the space. It's going to be a little bit trickier trying to disrupt a neighborhood and so forth. But ultimately it can provide great benefits. There's a policy that we're looking for at our organization called the Clean Heat Standard, which over time would require anybody trying to sell fossil fuel heat, whether it's gas or oil, to contribute to clean heat projects. And so I think that's the kind of thing that can support the heat pump market, can support network geothermal and stuff like that. But I think we need to get these pilot programs supported, but I don't think anyone knows how fast it's going to be able to contribute to our heating needs. I think that is a little bit speculative.
Yeah, another question I think is interesting. We've been talking about gas and oil and electricity, solar, geo. What about wood and burning wood to keep warm in the wintertime?
Wood is, I think, is in high demand in Europe and here in New England. And, I totally understand that. It does contribute to climate change. It does, it does produce carbon dioxide and particulate matter. The units you can buy today are obviously much cleaner than they were 20 years ago. But it's certainly a good option compared to, say, oil. If you've got a high efficiency modern wood pellet stove.
Okay.
Great.
I can see a couple other questions. When will the Massachusetts EV rebates kick in and the breakdown? We have a great EV program at our organization. Anna Vanderspeck, I think, knows more about EVs than anyone in the state. And she just wrote a blog about that. So if you go to greenenergyconsumers.org/blog, you can read about that. She tries to explain it. It's a little bit up in the air. The legislature needs to work on that. Beth asked, is there an appetite to bring SRECs to Massachusetts to encourage home and business solar? Right now, the dominant program for solar in Massachusetts is called the SMART program, which has been pretty successful. And I think we just need to expand it in the next administration in order to keep up with our climate goals. And I think you'll see that, I would suspect.
Larry, one final question. What do you, if you had to guess, and it is just a guess, who knows, what do you think is going to happen with electricity and gas prices over the next 3 to 4 months during this winter? Do you think they're going to continue to spiral up, or do you think the fact that Europe has filled its tanks and seems to be ready to go for this winter is going to ameliorate this situation?
This is just my guess, to be honest with you. Gas prices that we use to heat our homes are pretty much set. They're up 24 or 34% higher than last year, but the gas companies bought what they needed to buy to serve our needs, and they hedge that cost, and it's for several months at a time. So that's going to be what it is, 24 or 34%. I think heating oil prices are going to be totally dependent upon how cold it is. That could go up. If it continues to be warm, we might see heating oil prices tumble. And we might see that in Europe as well. What I'm hearing about is that the storage in Europe right now it's good that it's 100%, but that can get depleted very quickly within a matter, just like it filled up. They filled it up because they knew they needed to, they were panicking. They just filled the storage But if it gets cold, they're not going to be able to replenish that. And so weather is going to determine what happens to the worldwide price of gas, which comes back to your question, what is it going to do to electricity prices? It's really dependent upon how cold it gets all over the world. And so I worry, that there's no way to really predict that. I don't think the forecasters, interestingly, the Energy Information Administration for the U.S. government thinks it's going to be colder than the last couple of years. And then NOAA, the National Oceanographic Administration, thinks it's going to be warmer. Two great federal agencies with different visions of how cold or warm it's going to be in the United States. So I don't know. This is why I'm saying, now the other point I want to make is, even if it's, regardless of what happens, whether it's warm or cold in Europe this winter, everything I'm reading is that Vladimir Putin is caused enough problems that next winter is likely to be as bad or worse. And so this could continue to be a problem for us here in New England for over a year.
There we go. All right. Well, let's. We're going to finish it there tonight. Again, I just posted again the blog. Excuse me, the blog post on EV rebates that your staff member published last week, I think it was. And there's lots of information resources in the chat. Thank you very much, Larry.
Thank you, Jeff.
Excellent job. You covered an amazing amount of ground so capably and substantively in an hour and 20 minutes. Please join us for our next program, which will be held on Thursday, November 17th. We will be hosting Creating a Zero Waste World, How We Can Eliminate Toxic Trash and Poisonous Plastics, featuring Kirsty Pecci, formerly of the Conservation Law Foundation and the new Executive Director of Just Zero. Kirsty will be outlining how we can support zero waste strategies in a variety of ways, including ending plastic pollution and packaging waste, opposing dangerous facilities that burn and bury trash, and fighting climate change by putting food and yard waste to good use. That will be on Thursday, November 17th. Information's on our website, metrowestclimatesolutions.org. And there will be a recording of this program this evening posted on our website as well in probably a few days. Thank you all very much for joining us. And once again, thank you, Larry. Thank you for being here tonight. What a great program.
Thank you. Good night.